Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. For those who are new, my name is Monica, and today I have my monthly wrap up for you. In the month of February, I read 27 books. That's my main genre, so I'm breaking it down by subgenre in romance. If it isn't romance, it will just say fiction or thriller or horror or whatever. But if it's a romance heavy, then I'm going to put romantic suspense. So without further ado, here are my stats. So in the month of February, I read 5 historical romance books. I read 7 contemporary romance books, 3 sports romances, 3 dark/taboo romances, 2 mafia romances, 3 romantic suspense, 2 romantic fantasy, 1 paranormal romance, and 1 general fiction. So I rated 7 books 5 stars, 9 books 4.5 stars, 3 books 4 stars, 1 book 3.5 stars, 1 book 3 stars, and 1 book I finished it, but I won't rate it. I didn't like it, and I'm not going to rate it. I also did not rate my DNFs, and there were 3 of those, and I do not rate my rereads, and I had 2 rereads. Okay, so I had 7 books that I rated 5 stars, and the first one is Whispers of You by Catherine Cowles. This is the first book in her Lost and Found series. It's her new series. And the reason why I gave this 5 stars is because normally I can pick out the twists, I can pick out who is the villain and stuff, and I genuinely enjoyed them, but she got me on this one, which is surprising. And not only that, is I loved the romance, I loved how he did grovel, and I loved the dynamic between the hero and the heroine, and that there was a lot of character growth in the book between the heroine and the hero. The heroine was very dependent early on in their relationship towards the hero, and the hero was kind of flighty at the very beginning, and then this really big tragedy happens, and this happens in the prologue, and then he decides to leave because he thinks he's not good for her. He comes back 10 years later, and they've both grown up, and she's a lot more independent, and she can take care of herself and not depend on others, and I truly enjoyed their dynamic and their romance, and that's why I gave it 5 stars. That, and she got me on the twist. Okay, so the second book that I want to talk about that I gave 5 stars is Sin Bin. It's book 4 in the Carolina Common series, and this is by Tegan Hunter, and this is a hockey romance. And it is also age gap, and it's taboo, although I didn't really consider it. I mean, yeah, it is taboo, but I put it towards more sports romance because he's a hockey player. She works in the PR department, but she is also the assistant coach's niece, and there is a moratorium on inter-office dating. They are not allowed to date. However, this is also a second chance romance because they meet 2 years prior at a bar, and they go and have a one-night stand that turns into a weekend, and then they find out that he's a hockey player and she's working in the PR department. So there is a lot of pining between the hero and the heroine, but not only that, you can feel the tension because they both desire each other, but they know they cannot be together. And he is older. There's a 10-year age gap, and he's getting towards the end of his career, so he has to make decisions, and she's up for a promotion, but she cannot be with him if she's going to get this promotion. So there's a lot of different dynamics at play in this book, and Tegan Hunter did it perfectly, and I loved every minute of this book. The next book I want to talk about, and it was a surprise for me that I loved it as much as I did. I like novellas just fine, but they don't typically make my favorites list. But it's Get Thee Off My Lawn by Daria Vernon. Christi from Christi Reads Romance, she was talking about it, and I saw the cover and I was like, oh, okay, I'm gonna have to read this because it sounds really funny. So this is a historical romance novella about April Nightingale, and she is distraught because her beloved swan Gerald has gone to her neighbor's property and has not returned home. So she sneaks onto her neighbor's property to find Gerald the swan, and then she gets stuck in the pond trying to catch Gerald, but it's not Gerald she catches, and she ends up getting stuck. Well, along comes Leopold Daring, who is her neighbor, and he helps her out of the pond, and there's instant attraction because novellas are generally instant lust because you only have I think this is 130 pages-ish. So there isn't a lot of time to develop a lot. But the time that Daria Vernon had in this book, she used to the fullest. She told a complete story in this. So after Leopold helps April get out of the pond, he sneaks her back to his house, his father's house, because she's sopping wet, and they end up having a bit of an affair, and then he contrives a way to meet her again because he can't get her out of his head, and then this stuff happens, and then they have their HEA, and it's fantastic, and it's worth 130 pages. It is really, really fun. It's a great read. It's funny. It made me laugh. It does not take itself seriously, and I highly recommend it. Okay, so the next book I want to talk about is also a recommendation from Christi, and it's Nobody's Duke by Scarlett Scott, and it's book 1 in the Leagues of Dukes series. And this one is a second chance romance, and this one has a lot of heart, honestly. So Arya is a widow, and she has an 8-year-old son. 9 years ago, she was stood up on a road by the love of her life, Clayton. And Clayton is the illegitimate son of a duke. And then during that time period, if you were born on the wrong side of the blanket, you did not have a lot of rights. You could not inherit. You were considered damaged goods, I guess you could say it, and he was not the best prospect for her. When they fell in love 9 years ago, they were going to run away and get married. However, her father found out, did some stuff, and they thought that each other had changed their minds. And then flash forward to 9 years later, when she is now a widow and her son is now a duke because her husband was murdered. And the people who murdered her husband were Irish nationalists, and she is their next target. So Clayton is now tasked to protect her by the Home Office, and he's angry at her for what happened, and she's angry at him for what happened, and there's a lot of hurt that happened there. And when he goes to protect her, that's when sparks flies, communication finally happens, and their truths are told, and they have their HEA. And this is a very intelligent book. The writing is intelligent, the storytelling is intelligent, the characters, there's growth, and it's just well paced and well plotted, and I do highly recommend it. So thank you, Christi. So the next book I want to talk about is Between Hello and Goodbye by Emma Scott. And this book put me into a bit of a slump because I had such a hangover after this book. It was so good. This was my first Emma Scott book, and it's definitely not going to be my last, but I had expectations going into this book because everybody loved it, and my expectations were exceeded. I loved this book. Fate is a party girl who lives in Seattle. Asher is a fireman paramedic who lives in Hawaii with his brother and his brother's wife and his nephew. And Faith's lifestyle, she's a party girl. It's interfering with her job because she comes in hungover. She does a lot of walk of shame. She doesn't come in on time, and she falls asleep at her desk, but yet she's so good at her job that they just don't want to fire her. They want to promote her. So they give her 2 weeks to figure herself out. So she goes to take a vacation in Hawaii to get away and to really start thinking about her life and how she really wants to live her life, and to get away from a very specific friend who's kind of toxic for her, honestly. Anyway, she ends up going on this hike, sprains her ankle. Asher is one of the paramedics who comes in and saves her, and she's airlifted away. Anyway, he ends up going to the hospital and starts helping her. There's an instant connection, and they deny it at first because she's from Seattle, he's from Hawaii. Well, he's a transplant onto Hawaii. Well, you really need to read the book to understand his motivations more so, simply because I don't want to give things away. Okay. So I guess I'm just going to put a spoiler, because I was trying to figure out how to say this without spoiling it, but I'm just going to put a spoiler because I just want to talk about it. So Asher has taken care of his brother since his mother became a drug addict and nearly burnt down their homes when he was 17, and his brother was a lot younger. Asher and his brother lived in New York. He put himself through Columbia University, worked on the stock exchange, he was highly successful. His brother went to Hawaii to take some pictures, met the love of his life, and moved to Hawaii. And so Asher followed his brother because he's always felt this need to protect his brother since that fire. Well, that is why Asher is like, I will never go back to the mainland. And Faith, her life is on the mainland. Her best friend is on the mainland, and she doesn't know if she could live on a small island. I mean, you get island fever, and that is a real thing. Anyway, so here's the thing with this book. All right, so here's the thing about this book. Their chemistry is explosive. I believed their lust, and then I believed how they fell in love. And they had a lot of hurdles to go through to get from their meeting to their HEA, and they really do go through it. And there's not just what they go through as a couple, it's what they go through individually. And I really enjoyed the dynamic through this entire book. You go on this very emotional journey with these characters, and by the end I was really impressed. I was impressed with the writing style, I was impressed with the character growth, the pacing, and the emotional turmoil that you feel by the end, because you're feeling it with these characters by the end, and it was just so good. And I really do recommend this book. So after Between Hello and Goodbye, I tried to read a couple books, and that's where some of my DNFs happened, was because I was a little slumpy. But then I needed to read A Court of Mist and Fury, which is book 2 in the ACOTAR series by Sarah J. Maas. I did vlog this, but I'll link the vlog down below because I'm not going to rehash it in this video, because I had a lot of feelings about this book. But I will say this, the story worked for me despite certain things that she did. And if you want to know more about those certain things, just go watch my vlog. I loved the cauldron scene, and I actually fell for Nesta at that point because she was such a good character. But also Rhys was such a sympathetic character. He was so different from book 1, and I grew to really love him. But the character growth and the world building was perfection in A Court of Mist and Fury, which is the reason why it's on my favorites list. Okay, so the last 5-star book I read in February is In a Jam by Kate Canterbury. Now this is a surprise for me because I tried to read a couple of her books and they just never really worked out for me. So I decided to give it a chance. It's a very emotional second chance. At the beginning, he is a single dad, marriage of convenience, and a very grumpy, pining hero. And this book very much surprised me. I really, really enjoyed this book. Like, this story was about healing as a couple, as individuals, and as a family. There's a child in this book, Jenny. Her backstory is so tragic. It's his niece, because he's her father figure. He has custody of his niece. She's a kindergartner who swears like a sailor, and she loves pirates. And I was like, oh my gosh, I love this little girl. But she does this as a defense mechanism. And at the beginning of the book, our heroine is left a tulip farm by her step-grandmother. But one of the clauses in the will, for her to keep this tulip farm, she has to be married. She moves back to, I think it's like Friendship, Rhode Island, and she re-meets the hero, Noah, and they end up rebonding, and he's always loved her, but she never knew it. She has a lot of trauma where she felt like she was always left behind, and she didn't realize that Noah's always loved her. Anyway, he makes a proposition that they get married so she can keep the tulip farm. And it is their romance, and it is so beautiful. And I actually was afraid for the third act breakup because I was afraid she was going to assume and do something dumb, and she didn't. I was so surprised. I was so happy. It could have gone a whole different way, and if it did, it would not have made my 5-star. I would not have loved it if it had gone the way I thought it was going to. For about 10 minutes there, I was like, oh no, please don't do that. And she didn't. So my top read in the month of February is In a Jam by Kate Canterbury, and I highly recommend you go read this book if you haven't. The audiobook is out now. Jason Clark is the male narrator, and he does a fantastic job. He's one of my favorites. So those were my favorites in the month of February. What was your favorite book that you read in February? Or have you read any of these? Let me know down below. And if you don't want to comment on any of that, then please leave me a pink heart emoji, since we are ending February. Anyway, please like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I'm posting future content. Bye.